Picture a really cold Wednesday morning in Toulouse, France. It is March 1st, 2000.
Right in the middle of winter.
Exactly. So the doors of the local police station in this very quiet residential neighborhood of Lormeaux have just opened, and a man walks in. He's 43 years old, impeccably dressed, and remarkably composed.
Serene even, like totally unbothered.
Yeah, completely. He just steps up to the desk and fills out this routine missing persons report for his 38-year-old wife. He hasn't seen her in 3 days. And when the desk officer asks if he has any theories, he calmly suggests she's probably just trying to teach him a lesson.
He signs the paperwork,
Yeah.
and he just walks out.
But then exactly 1 hour later, the doors of that very same police station fly open again, and a second man bursts in.
And his demeanor is the exact opposite of the first guy.
Oh, completely. He is frantic, he's weeping, his voice is shaking, he's talking a mile a minute, and he's demanding to speak to a senior supervisor immediately. He is there to report the exact same 38-year-old woman missing.
Because this man is her lover.
Right. And unlike the calm, unbothered husband, this weeping man looks the commanding police officer dead in the eye and explicitly accuses the husband of murder.
It is such an incredible scene to start with. You have two men, completely different emotional states, presenting two completely different realities about the exact same void.
Welcome to today's deep dive. We have a missing woman, a husband who seems to feel absolutely nothing, a lover who feels everything, and zero physical body. Today we are exploring the Viguier affair.
Which is undeniably one of France's most polarizing, baffling judicial enigmas. I mean, it really is.
It broke the country. For this deep dive, we are pulling from an immense stack of sources. We've got investigative journalism, highly detailed trial accounts, forensic reports, transcripts from deep dive documentaries, and even cinematic analyses of how this case literally broke the human mind.
But before we step into this labyrinth, we really need to establish the absolute ground rules for our exploration today, because you, the listener, are stepping into a narrative defined by permanent doubt.
Permanent doubt. That is the theme here.
Exactly. When a human being vanishes into thin air, it creates this massive psychological vacuum. And we abhor a mystery, right? The human brain is basically just a pattern recognition machine.
When there are blanks, we desperately try to fill them in with some kind of coherent story. We want it to make sense.
But our mission today is not to play armchair jury. We are not here to convict or exonerate anybody. We are going to examine this case with absolute impartiality.
Right, strictly respecting the presumption of innocence.
While also deliberately examining every single shadow, every strange contradiction, and every piece of missing evidence.
Because the terrifying part of a missing person case isn't just the absence of the victim. It's how that absence becomes a mirror for the prejudices of everyone left behind. The investigators, the media, and even the family.
You see what people want to see.
Exactly. So let's look at the people standing around this void. We really need to understand the architecture of the Viguier family. They live in this standard, unremarkable suburban home on Rue des Corbières.
And at the center of this household is the husband, Jacques Viguier.
Jacques is a public law and constitutional law professor at the University of Toulouse and Verst. And from all the profiles we have, he is a man composed entirely of contradictions.
Oh, he's a fascinating psychological study. If you put Jacques Viguier in a university amphitheater, he is an absolute titan. I mean, he lectures on highly complex constitutional law theory to hundreds of students at a time without ever looking at a single note.
Just commands the room.
His intellect is formidable, but the moment he steps off that podium, the whole persona just crumbles.
Right, because outside the academic sphere, he is universally described as socially awkward, physically clumsy, and just intensely introverted.
He's a man who understands the theoretical architecture of the state, but struggles to navigate basic human interactions. And there's a serious class dynamic at play here, too.
Yeah, we have to touch on that.
Yeah.
The media would eventually try to paint him as this arrogant, untouchable, bourgeois city elite. But that really wasn't his background, was it?
Not at all. He actually has really deep rural roots in the Ariège Mountains, which is south of Toulouse. His family background is very grounded and traditional.
So the tension comes from how he is perceived versus how he actually operates in the world.
Exactly. He's highly educated, but he lacks that polished, aristocratic smoothness of the true urban elite. And this awkwardness extends profoundly into his personal life, particularly regarding his reputation on campus.
Right, because we have to talk about the open secret at the university. For years, Jacques is engaged in serial affairs with his female students.
But the sources are very careful to distinguish the nature of these affairs. They don't describe him as a predatory, aggressive Don Juan type of figure.
No, the psychological profiles drawn up later describe him as a deeply insecure, almost timid man who is constantly seeking validation.
He managed to charm these young women not through aggressive seduction, but through the sort of intellectual paternalism. He was brilliant, he was protective, he was gallant.
He basically presented himself as a misunderstood intellectual who needed comforting. It was a pattern of seeking emotional refuge outside his home.
Which brings us directly to his wife, Suzanne, known to everyone in Toulouse as Susie.
Susie is the absolute inverse of Jacques. She was actually one of his students when they first met, which completely fits his exact pattern, but she didn't stay in the rigid, structured world of law.
No, she's a dancer. She works as a choreographer at a transformist cabaret in the city. And we should clarify what that environment is, because it perfectly illustrates the huge chasm between her world and his.
Yeah, a transformist cabaret isn't just a standard nightclub. It's a venue entirely dedicated to the art of illusion.
Exactly. It features drag performances, intricate costume design, and highly theatrical lip-syncing and dance routines. It is nocturnal, it is vibrant, it's loud, and it's deeply social.
And Susie just thrives in this environment. She is magnetic, she loves socializing, she is a fixture on the local competitive tarot-playing circuit.
And above all, she is fiercely attached to their 3 children. They have an 11-year-old daughter named Clémence and 8-year-old twin boys, Guillaume and Nicolas.
So you have this rigid, introverted constitutional law professor and a vibrant nocturnal cabaret choreographer. Sounds like a complete recipe for disaster.
And by the year 2000, that disaster is fully realized. The marriage isn't just failing, it is a hollow, rotting shell.
They haven't shared a bed in 5 years. Since 1995, Susie had been sleeping in the guest room.
She had discovered his chronic infidelities early on, forgave him once, but he simply couldn't stop. So she severed the romantic relationship entirely.
They were essentially hostile roommates living under a localized Cold War. The atmosphere inside the house on Rue de Corbière is described by witnesses as completely unbearable.
They communicate almost exclusively through notes or by shouting at each other. They avoid being in the same room whenever possible.
The obvious question you have to ask is, why stay?
Because the legal and emotional gridlock is profound. Susie desperately wants out, but she is terrified of losing custody of her 3 young children.
And Jacques, for his part, absolutely refuses to grant a divorce. He views the dissolution of his family as an unacceptable personal failure.
And into this suffocating, toxic pressure cooker steps the 3rd main character in our deep dive today, Olivier Durand.
Olivier is 31 years old. He works as a building materials salesman, and he's a regular on the same tarot tournament circuit where Susie spends her weekends.
And for the last 2 years, he has been Susie's lover. But the word lover usually implies secrecy, right? Hidden hotel rooms, clandestine meetings.
Yeah, that is not the case here at all.
Right.
Olivier Durand is a constant, suffocatingly visible presence inside the Viguier home.
He eats dinner at their table. He plays video games with the twin boys. He helps out around the house. The emotional displacement is just staggering.
In fact, young Clémence actually wrote in her personal diary that she wished Olivier was her real father. Yeah, because he was the only source of laughter and playfulness in a house that otherwise felt like a tomb.
Wait, if Olivier is sitting at the dining room table eating dinner with the kids, where is Jacques? How is a husband, even an estranged one, tolerating this massive intrusion into his own home?
Well, Jacques' own extended family absolutely despises Olivier. Jacques' father explicitly calls Olivier a parasite, a sponge who just eats their food, drinks their wine, and inserts himself into a life he didn't build.
But Jacques' reaction, or rather, his absolute lack of reaction, is a key piece of the psychological puzzle here. Jacques employs a strategy of complete avoidance.
Right. Confronting Olivier would mean confronting the reality of his dead marriage, his own infidelities, and his failure to hold his family together.
So he just retreats, he goes to his study, he reads, he ignores the man sitting in his own living room. He essentially cedes his position in the household to avoid conflict.
Which perfectly sets the stage for the bizarre timeline of the final weekend Susie is seen alive. We are at the end of the winter school holidays. It's Saturday, February 26, 2000.
Susie and Olivier travel to a tarot tournament in the neighboring town of Montauban. These tournaments go extremely late into the night.
According to the timeline provided entirely by Olivier, they drive back to Toulouse in the early hours of the morning. He states that he dropped Susie off in front of the house on Rue de Corbière at exactly 4:30 a.m.
That's Sunday, February 27th. He claims he watches her walk up to the door and go inside. And that statement from her lover is the very last confirmed sighting of Suzanne Viguier.
Now, we have to shift to Jacques' timeline for that exact same Sunday morning. A few hours later, Jacques claims he woke up around 8 a.m.
He goes through his morning routine. He says he walked past the guest room, the room where Susie had been sleeping for the past 5 years, on this fold-out, click-clack sofa bed.
He tells police he glanced into the room and saw a figure in the bed. He naturally assumed it was Susie sleeping off the late tournament.
But, and this is crucial, he freely admits to the police that he didn't look closely enough to be sure. He says it could very well have been his 11-year-old daughter, Clémence, who had a habit of crawling into bed with her mother in the middle of the night.
Okay, stop right there. I have to push back on this because it defies all human logic.
It really does.
How do you look into a relatively small bedroom, see a physical body in a bed, and not know if it is a fully grown 38-year-old woman or an 11-year-old child?
It's crazy.
It's like glancing at your driveway and not knowing if a bicycle or an SUV is parked there. Mass, volume, shape. It makes zero sense unless you were actively covering up the fact that the bed was already empty.
If you judge that action by the standards of a healthy, functioning family, you are absolutely right. It sounds like an absurd, poorly constructed lie.
Yeah.
But we have to evaluate his actions within the specific, distorted reality of that household. They were entirely estranged. Jacques had spent 5 years training himself to actively unsee his wife.
That's a really dark way to put it. Unsee his wife.
When you deeply resent someone you live with, you avoid making eye contact, you avoid registering their presence. Jacques' failure to properly look at the bed might be the chilling cover story of a murderer. Or it might just be the sad, mundane reality of a completely broken man who glanced at a lump of blankets, didn't care who was under them, and just kept walking to make his coffee.
The failure to look closely is basically a symptom of the disease in that house.
Exactly. So Jacques makes his coffee. He goes about his morning. At 10 a.m., Jacques' father arrives at the house to pick up all 3 children.
They're going to spend the final Sunday of the school holidays at their grandparents' house. Jacques tells the investigators that immediately after his father and the kids drove away, he locked the front door, changed into his athletic gear, and went for a 1-hour jog along the Canal du Midi.
And right there, the investigators find their very first major chronological anomaly, because the police pull the telecommunication records for the house's landline.
And those phone records definitively show that Jacques made an outbound call from the house to his parents' landline at 10:45 a.m.
So his narrative just completely broke. He didn't leave for a jog immediately at 10 a.m. He was in that house, completely alone, for at least 45 minutes after the children left.
And he deliberately omitted this window of time when questioned by the police.
When investigators confront him with the phone records, Jacques' response is incredibly casual. He claims he simply forgot.
He says he must have lingered in the house, made the phone call to ensure the kids arrived safely, and then went for his jog.
But for a police detective, an unaccounted-for 45-minute window in the timeline of a suspect whose wife has vanished is a flashing red siren. What exactly happened during those 45 minutes?
10 months into the investigation, the police actually forced Jacques to physically reenact this specific jog just to test the veracity of his timeline.
And the details of this reenactment are wild. Jacques has always maintained he is not a natural athlete, that he rarely runs, and that his standard route along the canal takes him a full hour.
So the police take him out to the canal, flanked by escorts, and tell him to run his route.
Jacques proceeds to run the entire 6.5-kilometer route in exactly 30 minutes. He doesn't struggle. He barely breaks a sweat. He practically loses his police escorts because he's running so fast.
To understand how investigators process this, you have to look at the mechanics of alibi creation. Why would a man claim a run takes an hour when he can effortlessly complete it in 30 minutes?
The investigators immediately deduced that Jacques is inventing a physical alibi to artificially stretch his timeline.
They believed he ran for 30 minutes and used the remaining 30 minutes of that hour to do something else entirely, like cleaning a crime scene or moving a body.
So they are actively planting the seed of suspicion. But let's rewind the clock back to that Sunday afternoon. Jacques eventually finishes his run, takes a shower, and goes to his parents' house for lunch, utterly unconcerned about Susie's whereabouts.
Meanwhile, across town, Olivier Durandé is beginning to panic.
Olivier's panic is rooted in the established patterns of his affair. Susie was intensely communicative with him. They spoke on the phone multiple times a day.
When Sunday afternoon rolls around and Susie hasn't called, Olivier knows something is wrong. He drives his car past the house on Rue des Corbières.
He knows their specific household codes. Like, if the heavy wooden exterior shutters are closed, it means no one is home.
And the shutters are closed. He waits. He drives by again later in the afternoon. The shutters are still firmly closed. He calls her mobile phone incessantly. It goes straight to voicemail.
Finally, at 8:45 p.m. on Sunday night, Olivier manages to get Jacques on the landline. Jacques casually informs him that Susie isn't home, but notes that her car is still parked inside the garage.
For Olivier, this detail is a massive, terrifying red flag.
Because Olivier knows Susie's physical limitations. Susie is profoundly myopic. She relies heavily on her glasses or her contact lenses to function.
Furthermore, she uses her car for absolutely everything. She's not a pedestrian. The idea that she would voluntarily leave the house on foot for an extended period without telling anyone defies every established pattern of her behavior.
By Monday morning, Olivier's concern has escalated to sheer terror. He physically goes to the Viguier house.
And Jacques, who is still officially pretending he doesn't know Olivier is sleeping with his wife, allows him inside. They conduct a cursory look around the property.
Olivier immediately hones in on the bathroom. Susie's contact lens solution is sitting right next to the sink. Her everyday glasses are resting nearby.
To Olivier, this isn't just suspicious. It is definitive proof that she did not pack a bag and leave of her own free will. You don't run away to start a new life and leave your eyesight behind.
While Olivier is meticulously cataloging these terrifying anomalies, observe Jacques' behavior. It is Monday, the school holidays are ending, his wife has vanished without her glasses, without her car, and without saying goodbye to her beloved children.
And Jacques' reaction is to pack up the 3 kids and take them skiing for the day.
He operates under the rigid assumption that Susie has orchestrated this disappearance simply to teach him a lesson and embarrass him.
Which loops us perfectly back to our opening scene. Wednesday, March 1st. 3 days after the 4:30 a.m. drop-off. The dual police reports.
Jacques files his report with that chilling bureaucratic detachment. Olivier files his with fiery, emotional accusations of murder.
Now, a bizarre timeline, an unaccounted for 45 minutes, and a profound lack of emotional response are highly suspicious. They make you a terrible husband.
But they do not constitute a crime scene. A psychological profile cannot be presented to a jury as physical evidence.
If you want to prove a murder, you need forensics. You need a location. And that is why the events of March 10th changed the entire trajectory of this case.
Exactly. 10 days after the disappearance, the police finally secure a search warrant and step inside the house on Rue des Corbières.
The moment they start turning the house upside down, the narrative shifts from missing person to potential homicide. Let's walk through what they find, because the sheer accumulation of hidden items is staggering.
The initial search reveals several items that deeply contradict the idea of a voluntary departure. The police open a nondescript cupboard and find Susie's everyday handbag tucked away in the back.
Inside the bag are her house keys. And when investigators ask Jacques about this, he admits that he had actually discovered the bag the day before the police arrived.
But he didn't call them. He found her keys and her purse, proving she couldn't have left under her own power, and he just kept it to himself for 24 hours.
His excuse. He tells the police that finding the bag made him suddenly realize something grave had happened, and he simply panicked and shut down.
Which is a catastrophic answer for an innocent man to give. Hiding evidence because you are scared makes you look incredibly guilty.
And the discoveries don't stop there. When they search the garage, they open the trunk of Susie's car. Lifted beneath the spare tire, completely concealed from view, they find a stack of freshly drafted divorce papers.
So she was planning her exit strategy. The motive for Jacques is crystallizing right there in the trunk.
But none of that compares to the absolute anchor of the entire prosecution's case. The police walk into the guest room, the room where Susie had slept for 5 years.
They approach the click-clack sofa bed. They pull it open, and the mattress is gone.
The bed is completely hollow. When the lead investigators ask Jacques where the mattress is, he doesn't deny its absence.
He confesses right there on the spot that he physically removed the mattress and threw it away at a local public dump on March 8th, 2 days before the police executed their search warrant.
I need to pause the narrative here, because this is where my brain completely short-circuits. We are talking about a brilliant professor of constitutional law.
A man who understands the criminal justice system intimately.
Right. His wife has been missing for over a week. The police are involved. He knows he is the prime suspect. And he decides to wrestle a bulky mattress out of his house, strap it to a vehicle, and dump it at a landfill.
It is the equivalent of standing in front of a police station holding a smoking weapon and claiming you just liked the weight of it.
Basic self-preservation should override whatever he was thinking. Spite doesn't make you throw away the primary piece of evidence in your wife's disappearance.
It is the most baffling decision in the entire affair, and his explanations for why he did it only dig the hole deeper. Initially, he tries to deflect.
He tells the police he threw the mattress away because it was old, deeply stained, and Susie had complained it was uncomfortable.
He even concocts a story that he spent the day after he dumped it driving to different furniture stores looking for a replacement.
But investigators immediately interview witnesses who completely destroy that lie. Susie's friends confirm she had purchased that exact mattress brand new just 3 months prior. It wasn't old.
So he's caught in a massive lie, and it forces him to completely change his story 9 months later during interrogations. This time, he gives a deeply emotional, psychological explanation.
He says he threw it away out of pure, unadulterated spite. He claims that looking at the empty mattress symbolized the utter humiliation and failure of his marriage.
He tells police he was furious that she had seemingly abandoned him and the children, and most importantly, he says he was disgusted by the thought that Olivier Durande, the man he hated, had likely been on that mattress inside his own home.
He wanted to destroy it so that if Susie ever came crawling back, she would be forced to sleep in the marital bed with him.
If you bring in a behavioral psychologist, they might look at that second explanation and see something painfully human. It is messy, it is irrational, it is profoundly petty, and it sounds exactly like the kind of destructive tantrum a scorned, deeply insecure spouse might throw.
But from a legal and investigative standpoint, a psychological tantrum is indistinguishable from a calculated cover-up.
Exactly. To a homicide detective, a husband throwing away his missing wife's mattress looks exactly like a man destroying a mattress soaked in arterial blood.
And what makes this infinitely worse for Jacques is what happens at the public dump. Shortly after Jacques disposes of the mattress, a mysterious, localized fire breaks out at that exact section of the landfill.
The fire completely incinerates the area. By the time the police realize the mattress is missing from the house, the actual mattress at the dump has been reduced to ash.
It can never be recovered, it can never be swabbed for DNA or sprayed with luminol.
The fire creates a permanent black hole in the forensic timeline. But the police attempt a highly controversial tactic to close that hole. They find a different surviving blue mattress at the dump.
They bring Jacques to the site, point to this blue mattress from a distance, and ask him if it is his. Jacques looks at it and replies, "Yes, I think that's it."
But the police know it's a trap. A click-clack sofa requires a very specific type of mattress, one with a flexible hinge or a defined fold down the middle to accommodate the folding mechanism of the couch.
The blue mattress they showed him was a solid, rigid piece of foam. It physically could not have fit on his sofa.
To the investigators, this is the ultimate gotcha moment. By agreeing to claim a physically impossible piece of evidence, they believe Jacques is desperately trying to close the loop on his lie, proving his guilt.
Years later, his defense attorneys will argue that Jacques was sleep-deprived, terrified, intimidated by the police, and simply agreed to whatever they pointed at just to make the interrogation stop.
They argue he barely looked at it. But the damage is done. The police are convinced the mattress was the murder scene.
So the mattress is gone, but what about the rest of the room? What about the rest of the house? If the mattress was soaked in blood, there have to be blood elsewhere.
They bring in the heavy forensic teams, the crime scene technicians, and they do find blood.
But we need to be incredibly precise about the mechanics of this forensic evidence. We are not talking about pooling blood. We are not talking about drag marks across the floorboards.
No, we are talking about microscopic droplets, trace elements that are entirely invisible to the naked eye.
Right. The technicians swab the house and find a microscopic speck of Susie's blood on a concrete pillar near the base of the stairs. They find another microscopic trace on a plastic basin in the bathroom.
They find Jacques' blood on his own jogging shorts. But the crucial piece, the smoking gun for the forensic team, is found on Jacques' footwear.
They recover a microscopic trace of mixed blood containing the DNA of both Jacques and Susie on Jacques' right sneaker.
When investigators sit Jacques down in the interrogation room and demand an explanation for how his and his wife's blood became mixed on his shoe, his answer is astonishingly weak.
He claims that during a family vacation to the center of France a long time ago, he and Susie were doing yard work.
He says they were trimming a tree branch together. The branch snapped unexpectedly. They both tumbled to the ground. They both sustained scrapes, and they both bled onto his shoe at the same time.
I'm sorry, but that is preposterous. It feels like a fabricated alibi constructed by someone who understands the legal requirement of explaining DNA, but fundamentally fails to understand human behavior.
You do not engage in cooperative, synchronized tree trimming with a spouse you actively despise and avoid.
And his excuse for the blood found on the mattress cover in the laundry basket is just as bad. He claims that despite sleeping in separate rooms for 5 years, they spontaneously attempted to make love during her menstrual cycle, slipped on the wooden slats of the bed, and created a mess.
It is grasping at straws. It sounds absurd because it is absurd. But here is where we must forcefully apply the principle of permanent doubt.
We have to look at the mechanics of the crime the prosecution is alleging.
The police theory is that Jacques violently murdered his wife in that house, likely by severe bludgeoning or strangulation, and then physically dismembered or packaged her 38-year-old body to remove it from the premises during that 45-minute window.
A violent murder and a body disposal is a massive, messy, physical undertaking.
Exactly. If you bludgeon a human being to death in a residential room, blood does not just politely stay on the mattress. It creates high-velocity spatter. It hits the walls, the ceiling, the baseboards.
If you drag a bleeding body, the luminal doesn't just show a microscopic speck. It reacts with the iron and the hemoglobin to map out a horrifying fluorescent constellation of chemical reactions everywhere. A sponge wiped, everywhere a mop dragged, tracing the exact path of the cleanup across the grout of the tiles.
Where's the evidence of massive chemical bleach usage? The Viguier house was notoriously cluttered and messy. It did not look meticulously scrubbed or sterile.
We are forced to weigh Jacques' bizarre, highly suspicious behavior and terrible excuses against the stark physical reality of the scene. The macroscopic physical evidence of a brutal murder simply did not exist.
But the investigators didn't care about the lack of macroscopic evidence because by this point they had succumbed to severe tunnel vision.
The media and the police had locked onto Jacques Viguier as the sole perpetrator, and they began interpreting every fact only if it fit that specific narrative.
I constructed a monster. They looked at his lack of emotion, his bizarre explanations, his rural background combined with his high-level intellectual status, and they profiled him as a cold-blooded, arrogant sociopath.
They believed he had used his vast knowledge of the legal system to purposefully design and execute the perfect crime.
The arrogance of the investigators is actually documented. One of the lead investigators, Commissioner Sabi, literally walked up to Jacques' father and told him that the police and Jacques were engaged in a high-stakes chess game.
Sabi confidently stated that the police would win, that they would force a confession, and that they were fully prepared to break Jacques psychologically to get it.
Based almost entirely on this psychological profiling and the missing mattress, Jacques is thrown into jail. He spends 9 agonizing months in solitary confinement awaiting trial.
And while the entire investigative apparatus of the French state is laser-focused on breaking the arrogant professor, they are completely turning a blind eye to a massive, glaring shadow in the investigation.
They are completely ignoring the lover, Olivier Durande.
This is the pivot that breaks the case wide open. Why on earth did the police treat Olivier Durande as a grieving victim instead of a prime suspect?
He was the absolute last person to see her alive at 4:30 in the morning.
In any standard investigation, the last person to see the victim is suspect number 1.
It is a textbook sociological study in narrative bias. Olivier Durande gave the police exactly what they wanted. He was weeping. He was highly cooperative.
He provided them with a fully formed narrative that pointed the finger directly at the husband.
Because he performed the social role of a victim flawlessly, the police subconsciously categorized him as an ally. They let their guard down. But if we peel back the layers of Olivier's actions, the anomalies are staggering.
Let's talk about the babysitter, because this detail is terrifying. Earlier, we mentioned that on the Monday after Susie disappeared, Olivier went to the house.
But the police also took a statement from the Viguier's regular babysitter. In her original deposition, she stated she went to the house on Monday to check things out.
She claimed that while she was there, she looked in the bathtub and saw what appeared to be a pinkish film of washed-away blood.
The police used the babysitter's statement to heavily bolster their theory that Jacques had dismembered the body in the bathtub. But years later, a devastating truth emerges.
The babysitter did not go to the house alone that Monday. She went with Olivier Durande. He secretly entered the house with her.
And more importantly, Olivier explicitly instructed the babysitter to lie to the police and completely omit his presence from her official statement.
Why? Why would a grieving, innocent lover secretly enter the house of the missing woman, search it, and then demand a cover-up from a witness?
What was he actually doing inside that house before the police arrived? Was he looking for something? Did he remove something?
The defense lawyers later raise a terrifying alternative hypothesis. What if Jacques' timeline is entirely innocent? What if a confrontation between Susie and Olivier went horribly wrong at 4:30 a.m. when he dropped her off?
It is a totally viable hypothesis, but we will never know the answer because the police never seriously investigated Olivier's timeline. They barely searched his apartment. They took his account of the tarot tournament and the drive home as absolute gospel.
And the tunnel vision of the investigators doesn't just lead them to ignore evidence. It leads them to actively destroy it. Prepare yourself, because this next detail represents a staggering failure of justice.
Let's talk about Susie's missing purse.
We established she left her handbag and keys at home. But her actual wallet, the one containing her identification cards or bank cards or supermarket loyalty cards, was missing.
Yes. For 15 days after she vanished, the whereabouts of her wallet are unknown. Then, someone walks into a local supermarket in the area and drops Susie's wallet into the lost and found bin.
The supermarket staff eventually handed over to the police. The police officially logged the victim's wallet into their evidence locker.
And then, in the year 2001, the police accidentally incinerate the wallet.
They just throw it in the incinerator and burn it.
They never swabbed the leather for DNA. They never dusted the plastic cards for fingerprints. They never went to the supermarket to pull the security camera footage to see who physically dropped it in the bin.
They never interviewed the cashiers. They just destroyed the most critical piece of physical evidence in the entire case.
Calling it incompetence almost doesn't cover it. It is the result of absolute systemic confirmation bias. The investigators had already decided with religious certainty that Jacques was the killer.
Therefore, their subconscious logic dictated that anything not pointing to Jacques was irrelevant. If Jacques killed her on Sunday morning, who cares about a wallet found 15 days later?
They devalued the evidence because it contradicted their primary narrative, leading to its careless destruction.
But despite the entire justice system bearing down on him, Jacques has fierce defenders. His children defend him. And remarkably, Susie's own mother, Claude Petit, defends the man accused of murdering her daughter.
To understand why, we have to look at a haunting historical parallel. This is the ghost of 1946.
This is arguably the most emotionally profound aspect of the entire affair. To understand why Claude Petit refuses to join the mob demanding Jacques' head, you have to understand the trauma that forged her.
In 1946, in the southern French town of Narbonne, Claude's mother, Susie's grandmother, a woman named Renée Lamarca, was brutally murdered.
She was shot twice in the head in her own home.
Yes. And when the post-war police arrived at the crime scene, they immediately focused on Renée's husband, Charles Lamarca. The police walked into the bedroom, touched Charles's side of the bed, and noted that the mattress was cold.
They applied a flawed, simplistic deduction. If his side of the mattress is cold, he must not have been sleeping. If he wasn't sleeping, he must be the killer.
Charles Lamarca was arrested, thrown in jail, and publicly vilified as a monster by the press.
Only to be completely cleared of all charges months later when it was definitively proven he was innocent. The real killer of Susie's grandmother was never found.
Claude Petit was just 6 years old when her mother was assassinated, and her innocent father was falsely imprisoned by arrogant investigators based entirely on the temperature of a mattress.
Now, 54 years later, her own daughter vanishes, and the modern police arrive, arrest her son-in-law, tear him away from his 3 children, and lock him in solitary confinement based entirely on the absence of a mattress.
It is history repeating itself with terrifying precision. The trauma of 1946 dictates Claude Petit's actions in 2000.
She knows intimately what happens when investigators fall in love with their own theories. She absolutely refuses to let another innocent father be railroaded and destroyed by the state. She takes a stand and testifies vehemently for Jacques' defense.
So if we pause here, standing on the edge of the trials, I have to ask you, the listener, to check your own internal compass. What evidence holds the most weight for you?
Do you focus on the husband who throws away his missing wife's mattress, lies about his morning phone call, and displays the emotional depth of a stone?
Or do you focus on the lover who is the absolute last person to see her alive, who sneaks into the house in the aftermath and deliberately commands witnesses to lie to the authorities?
And can you trust a police investigation that is so arrogant in its psychological profiling that it literally burns the victim's wallet rather than process it for DNA. It all leads to the grand climax of this saga, the trials.
Jacques Viguier is eventually formally indicted for the murder of his wife. The wheels of justice move incredibly slowly. It takes 9 full years for the case to finally go before a jury.
In April 2009, the first trial begins in the city of Toulouse. And you have to describe the atmosphere of this trial because the sources paint a devastating picture of Jacques. He does not look like a man fighting for his life.
He is a completely broken entity. The brilliant, commanding professor who used to captivate university amphitheaters is gone.
He sits inside the glass defendant's box, hunched over, staring at the floor, practically mute. The press cruelly dubs him a wax figure.
When the judge or the aggressive prosecutors ask him a direct question, he mumbles, he hesitates, he gives convoluted academic non-answers. Optically, he looks incredibly guilty.
The prosecution recognizes this weakness and leans in hard. They portray him exactly as the police profiled him, an arrogant bourgeois monster who thought his intellect placed him above the law.
They parade a succession of his former student mistresses through the courtroom to systematically destroy his character, painting him as a cold manipulator of women.
But the true theater of the courtroom is the familial civil war playing out in the gallery. On one side of the aisle, you have Susie's sisters.
They are represented by high-profile, aggressive civil attorneys who are demanding justice for Susie and furiously pointing the finger at Jacques.
On the exact opposite side of the aisle, you have Jacques' children, Clémence, Guillaume, and Nicolas, who are now young adults, sitting alongside Susie's mother, Claude Petit, presenting a united, fierce front defending Jacques.
Clémence, the daughter who once wished Olivier was her father, actually takes the witness stand, and she unleashes hell on the investigators.
She openly accuses the police of never spending a single day searching for her mother alive. She accuses them of dedicating an entire decade solely to finding a way to frame her father.
Despite Jacques' disastrous passive performance in the box, the jury is forced to look at the actual physical evidence presented. There is no body, there is no confession.
There are only microscopic trace droplets of blood, a missing mattress, and the revelation of a burned wallet. The burden of proof is simply not met.
On April 30th, 2009, the jury in Toulouse acquits him. They declare him not guilty.
But the French judicial system has a mechanism that the American system does not. The prosecution can appeal an acquittal, and the prosecution in Toulouse is absolutely furious.
They immediately file an appeal, which forces a second trial. The appeal trial takes place in the town of Albi in March 2010.
And the dynamic of the Albi trial is entirely different. Jacques has had a year to recover from the ordeal of the first trial. He is rested, his mind is sharper.
But the most significant change is his legal representation. He hires a new defense attorney, the legendary Eric Dupond-Moretti.
For those outside of France, Eric Dupond-Moretti is a force of nature. He is a massive, physically imposing man with a booming voice, famous across the country for securing acquittals in seemingly impossible high-stakes cases.
He is theatrical, he is deeply aggressive, and he is a brilliant legal tactician. And right at the beginning of the Albi trial, the presiding judge, Jacques Viguier, makes a procedural ruling that changes everything.
He allows a massive coup d'état. He admits dozens of hours of previously withheld police wiretaps, écoute téléphonique, into the official trial evidence.
These were audio recordings the police had quietly made of the key players during the initial investigation, but had never fully transcribed or utilized during the first trial in Toulouse.
And whose voice is heavily featured on those secret tapes. Olivier Durand, the grieving lover.
The contents of the tapes are explosive. The court listens to audio of Olivier Durand explicitly colluding with the babysitter, directly instructing her on how to lie to the police about their secret visit to the house.
The tapes capture Olivier boasting to friends about his cozy relationship with the investigators, asking police for special favors, and actively trying to steer the direction of the investigation away from certain avenues and toward Jacques.
It is an absolute bombshell. The facade of the innocent, grieving lover shatters in real time.
In an unprecedented cinematic twist, right in the middle of the murder trial of Jacques Viguier, the police march up to the primary accuser, Olivier Durand, arrest him outside the courtroom doors, and place him in custody for witness tampering.
The entire polarity of the trial reverses. It essentially ceases to be the murder trial of Jacques Viguier.
Under Dupond-Moretti's cross-examination, it transforms into a devastating indictment of the police investigation and Olivier Durand's manipulations.
Dupond-Moretti smells the vulnerability and goes in for the kill. He delivers a legendary closing defense, He tears the police narrative to absolute shreds.
He screams that this is a Kafkaesque trial, where a man is forced to prove his innocence against invisible evidence. And then he uses a phrase that destroys the investigator's credibility. He calls the police work a concours lapin of hypotheses.
We need to explain that reference because it is a devastating insult in French culture. The concours lapin is a famous annual French invention fair.
It is known for showcasing highly elaborate, eccentric, and often completely absurd Rube Goldberg-style contraptions.
By calling the investigation a concours lapin, Dupond-Moretti is telling the jury the investigators did not follow the scientific method. They did not follow the evidence.
They sat around like amateur tinkerers, inventing increasingly bizarre, convoluted theories just to make the sparse facts fit their pre-chosen suspect.
And this brings us to a fundamental philosophical difference in how justice is served. It is essential to understanding why this case is so polarizing.
In Anglo-Saxon law, juries are instructed to find guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. It is designed to be an objective standard based entirely on the weight of the physical evidence presented.
But in French law, jurors are asked to rely on a concept called in-time conviction.
In-time conviction. Deep personal conviction.
It is a concept that dates back to the French Revolution. It is an almost spiritual inner certainty. The French Penal Code literally tells jurors that the law does not ask them to account for how they reached their conclusion.
It asks them to ask themselves in silence and reflection, what deep impression has the evidence made on your reason?
It is a highly subjective emotional standard. It inherently allows for a compelling narrative to sometimes override a lack of hard forensics.
There is actually a phenomenal 2019 French film about this exact concept, directly based on the Albi trial. It's called Une intime conviction, directed by Antoine Revel.
The film features the actor Olivier Gourmet delivering an incredible performance as Dupond-Moretti, but the protagonist is a fictional juror named Nora, played by Marina Foy, who becomes intensely obsessed with proving Jacques' innocence.
What that film captures so perfectly is the psychological danger of the void. The character of Nora starts out with noble intentions. She wants justice for an innocent man.
But she becomes so deeply obsessed with proving that Olivier Durande is the real killer that she begins using the exact same biased tunnel vision tactics that the police used against Jacques.
She starts breaking into places, stealing documents, harassing people. The film brilliantly demonstrates how the desperate desire for a neat, clean truth, the desire to fill the void, can turn ordinary people into monsters.
It shows how dangerous absolute certainty can be, regardless of which side you are on.
Dupond-Moretti uses his closing argument to attack this exact danger. He looks the jury in the eyes and reminds them that if police conviction and public disgust at a man's adultery were enough to send him to prison, the justice system would be dead.
He demands that the jury embrace the doubt. You cannot convict a man just because he's a terrible husband who threw away a mattress.
On March 20, 2010, after 10 agonizing years of suspicion, public crucifixion, and solitary confinement, the jury in Albi delivers their verdict. Based on their in-time conviction, Jacques Viguier is acquitted for a second and final time.
The prosecution accepts the defeat. They do not appeal to the highest court. The judicial process is officially over.
So, we arrive at the aftermath. Jacques Viguier walks out of the Albi courthouse. He returns to his quiet life in Toulouse. He resumes teaching constitutional law at the university. Legally and forever, he is an innocent man.
Olivier Durande receives a minor legal reprimand for his witness tampering and quietly fades away from the public eye.
But the central void, the agonizing black hole at the center of this entire decade-long saga, remains completely untouched. Suzanne Viguier is still missing.
Nobody has ever been recovered. No secondary suspect has ever been charged.
Which brings us to the end of our deep dive, and right back to the promise we made at the beginning. The principle of permanent doubt. We laid out the labyrinth. We explored the shadows.
So we leave you, the listener, standing at the end of a long hallway. There are 2 open doors in front of you.
Behind the first door is a brilliant, cold-blooded professor of law, a man who utterly despised his wife, who used his formidable intellect and understanding of the criminal justice system to execute the perfect crime.
A man who cleanly disposed of a human body in a 45-minute window, ruthlessly manipulated the psychology of his own children, and weaponized his own awkward demeanor to fool 2 separate juries.
And behind the second door is a deeply flawed, emotionally stunted, but entirely innocent father, a man trapped in a toxic, unbearable marriage whose strange, clumsy, and panicked reactions to a traumatic event were weaponized against him by an arrogant state.
A man nearly crushed by a system that preferred a clean narrative over messy facts, while the real killer, perhaps a manipulative lover, perhaps a violent stranger Susie encountered that night, walked away into the dark completely free.
The law has spoken. Jacques Viguier is innocent. But we know the human mind abhors a mystery. It wants to choose a door. We challenge you to reflect on your own internal verdict today.
Which door did you instinctively want to walk through as you listened? And more importantly, how much of that choice was based on the hard, undeniable facts, and how much was based on the story you desperately wanted to believe?
When we look at a crime, we expect the precision of an X-ray. We want a clean, visible, binary reality showing us exactly where the bone is broken.
But in the Viguier affair, the X-ray machine is fundamentally broken.
We are left standing in the murky, muddy waters of Rue de Corbière. The truth isn't clean. It isn't visible. It is just a missing mattress, a burned wallet, and an empty bed. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.